By the early 1930s, Italy stood at crossroads, restless, unsatisfied, reaching for something beyond its grasp. The scars of past humiliation still festered, and Mussolini, the self-proclaimed heir to Rome's imperial legacy, fought to rewrite Italy's place in the world. At home, the wounds of First World War had not healed. The promised rewards of victory, land, prestige, economic revival never materialized. Italians had bled for an empire, but instead they were left with economic stagnation, mass unemployment, and growing social unrest. The factories were silent, the streets volatile. Fascism found fertile ground in this despair. Mussolini, ever the opportunist, understood that a nation disillusioned could be made to believe in myths. Italy was not a mere European power, he declared, but a civilization destined to rule. Italy had already staked its claims in East Africa, Eritrea. Roads, railways, and military outposts carved through its highlands, turning it into a military staging ground. Somalia followed, its coastline dotted with Italian forts. Its trade controlled by Rome, the colony was unstable, its interior only loosely governed through fragile alliances with local rulers. Unlike the vast lucrative empires of Britain and France, Italy's holdings drained its treasury. Yet Mussolini did not see failure, he saw opportunity. The true prize lay ahead, the conquest that would redeem Italy's bruised pride and announce its arrival as a world power. To understand why Mussolini fixated on Ethiopia, one must look not to Africa, but to history. In 1896, an African army had shattered an Italian invasion force, an event that defied the very notion of colonial superiority. Mussolini knew that as long as Adwa remained unavenged, Italy would never be taken seriously. Britain and France, the architects of empire, viewed Italy as a lesser power, an upstart trying to force its way into game already decided. The League of Nations, meant to uphold peace, was weak and selective in its justice. Ethiopia, he declared, was not a sovereign state, but an aberration nation that had escaped the tide of European civilization for too long. Newspapers spoke of disorder, of primitivism, of land in need of Rome guiding hand. By 1935, the Italian war machine was in motion. The press filled the air with the drumbeats of war. The League of Nations watched but hesitated. Britain and France, wary of Hitler's rising power in Germany, sought to keep Mussolini on their side. And so the stage was set, erase the shame of Adwa, seize the final jewel of Italian East Africa, and prove once for all that Italy was not a second-rate power. The world held its breath. It is October 1935. Italy, led by Mussolini and driven by a fervent vision of fascist expansion, begins a brutal campaign to conquer Ethiopia, one of the last sovereign nations in Africa. This was not just a battle for land, it was a struggle for identity, freedom, and survival. The conflict would soon expose the failures of the League of Nations, the world's first attempt at a global peacekeeping body, revealing how power dynamics often trump justice in international politics. Italy's designs on Ethiopia were rooted in decades of national humiliation and colonial ambition. The defeat of Battle of Adwa in 1896, where Ethiopian forces overcame Italian invaders, left a mark on Italy's national consciousness. For Mussolini, this invasion was more than just territorial conquest. It was about revenge, a chance to establish Italy as a colonial power and restore its pride. Fascism ideology, premised on racial superiority, and a hierarchical world order cast Ethiopia not as a sovereign equal, but as a territory to be subdued and claimed. In October 1935, Italian forces launched their assault from Eritrea and Italian Somaliland. Backed by tanks, aircraft, and artillery, Mussolini troops deployed chemical weapons, including mustard gas, prohibited by the Geneva Protocol of 1925, inflicting unspeakable harm on soldiers and civilians alike. Whole villages were devastated, water sources poisoned, and landscapes scarred as Italy pushed further into Ethiopian territory. Despite Italy's overwhelming firepower, Ethiopian forces led by Emperor Haile Selassie mounted a fierce resistance. They fought with whatever weapons they had, their courage undimmed by technological disparity. Ethiopian fighters engaged in guerrilla warfare using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to launch ambushes and hold back Italian advances. But courage alone could not counterbalance the relentless bombing campaigns, artillery firepower, and chemical attacks that ravaged Ethiopia. As Italy's invasion escalated, Emperor Haile Selassie turned to the League of Nations, invoking the principle of collective security. The League was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of aggression. Ethiopia's appeal demanded that the League act to uphold its own ideals of peace, justice, and international solidarity. Britain and France, fearing the loss of Mussolini as a strategic ally, prioritized their own interest over Ethiopia's plea for justice. The sanctions, yes, of course, the sanctions, half-hearted and inconsistently enforced, failed to impede Italy's advance. By May 1936, Italian forces had captured Addis Ababa, and Mussolini declared Ethiopia part of the Italian Empire. The League's inability to intervene effectively signaled a profound moral failure, one that emboldened other aggressor states and revealed the League as a hollow institution unable to uphold its most basic principles. The League's failure in Ethiopia had repercussions far beyond Africa. This crisis exposed the fragility of collective security and fueled a climate of impunity, signaling to fascists and authoritarian regimes that international condemnation could be defied without consequences. It was a prelude to the global catastrophe of World War II, in which the League's weaknesses would be laid bare for all the world to see. Yet Ethiopia's spirit remained unbroken. In 1941, with Allied support during World War II, Ethiopia was liberated, reaffirming the sovereignty that Mussolini had sought to erase. The Italian-Ethiopian War revealed the tragic failings of the League of Nations. This was a failure of principle and action, a failure to protect a nation against aggression and genocide. 8 decades later, the echoes of the League's collapse resonate as the world faces a similar test in Gaza. Today, the United Nations is under scrutiny as Gaza endures an ongoing genocide. Despite the UN's mandate to uphold peace and protect human rights, it remains hamstrung by the political interest of powerful nations. Just as Britain and France allowed Mussolini's ambitions in exchange for their own security, today's global powers often remain silent or complicit. Yes, complicit, prioritizing alliances and economic interests over justice. The League's inability to protect Ethiopia serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the cost of inaction and compromise. Haile Selassie's warnings, "It is us today, it will be you tomorrow," resonates now as it did then. The lesson is stark. When institutions fail to stand up to oppression, they undermine the very foundations of peace and justice upon which they are built. As Gaza suffers, the world stands once again at a moral crossroads, facing the same choice between principle and pragmatism. In the end, the story of Ethiopia and Gaza is the story of humanity's struggle to uphold its ideals in the face of power and ambition. The question remains, will we learn from the past, or are we doomed to repeat it? For those who suffer, the answer could mean the difference between life and death.